3 mornings. That's how long the black SUV had circled Robert Thompson's farm. Before things escalated, today they sent a message in fire. A warning scrawled into the edges of his flag. But Bob wasn't rattled. He simply stared down the empty road, silently recalling places far more dangerous than Clear Springs. Across town, cartel leader Miguel Santos was tightening his grip, confident no one would dare resist. Little did Santos know, he'd just triggered a series of events that would turn the town into something he never expected. A fortress? Drop a comment and share where you're joining us from. If stories like this resonate with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey coming tomorrow. The sun peeked over the fields of Clear Springs, casting a golden glow on Robert Bob Thompson's small farm. At precisely 6 a.m., as he had done every day for 15 years, Bob stepped out onto his porch, an air of calm focus about him. His worn boots crunched against the gravel path leading to the flagpole. In his hand, he carried a weathered American flag, its edges frayed but meticulously folded. Bob's face remained stoic as he secured the flag to the halyard. Deep lines etched his skin lines that told stories of battles fought far from these peaceful fields. A faint scar ran down the side of his neck, just barely visible beneath his collar. He tugged the rope with steady precision, raising the flag into the morning sky where it caught the gentle breeze. As the fabric unfurled, he stood at attention, eyes locked on the symbol he had once risked everything to defend. The sound of an engine in the distance broke the stillness. Bob's gaze shifted toward the dirt road that ran alongside his property. A black SUV crawled past, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed the vehicle. This was the third morning in a row. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Instinct, sharpened over years of experience, told him he was being watched. After the SUV disappeared over the hill, Bob turned toward the gate at the edge of his property. Something caught his eye. A thin piece of paper flapped in the wind, tucked under the rusted chain. He approached and pulled it free. The message was brief but chilling. "This isn't your fight. Stay out of it." Bob's eyes narrowed. Quiet didn't mean weak. Not here. Not today. Miguel Santos leaned back in the corner booth of Delaney's diner, his boots resting arrogantly on the table. His sharp eyes scanned the room, noting the uneasy glances of the patrons and the forced smile on Sarah Delaney's face as she served him coffee. He thrived on fear, and this town was beginning to learn who was in charge. "Nice place," he said to Sarah, his voice low and measured. "Be a shame if something happened to it." Sarah swallowed hard, gripping the coffee pot a little too tightly. "We're just trying to run a business here, Mr. Santos." "Of course you are," he replied with a cold grin. "And I'm just here to make sure business runs smoothly." He let the words linger as his men, sitting at a nearby table, chuckled ominously. Meanwhile, across town, Sheriff James Barrett sat at his desk, staring at a growing stack of incident reports, vandalism, threats, intimidation, but no solid evidence to hold anyone accountable. Fear kept victims from talking. He sighed and leaned back, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The cartel had embedded itself deeply in Clear Springs, faster than he'd expected. He needed a plan, but every attempt to organize resistance had been met with silence or excuses. The townsfolk were scared, and he couldn't blame them. Barrett's thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. "Sheriff's office," he answered gruffly. "This is Sarah. Miguel Santos is here again." Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "I'll head over," Barrett said, though he knew his presence wouldn't do much. The cartel wasn't afraid of local law enforcement. At the same time, Bob Thompson was returning from town after a quick supply run. As he approached his property, he slowed the truck. Something was wrong. The flag he had raised that morning was now hanging lopsided and torn, its edges singed as if someone had deliberately burned it. His jaw tightened. Bob parked the truck and walked to the pole, his movements steady despite the surge of anger welling inside him. He studied the damage. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a calculated message. They wanted him to know they weren't done. Back at the diner, Santos casually mentioned something that caught Sarah off guard. Clear Springs isn't just a stopover for us. Let's just say, we've got bigger plans. He smiled cryptically before waving for his men to follow him out. The pieces were moving, but neither Bob nor the town knew the full extent of what was coming. Bob stood in his barn, the dim light casting shadows across the worn tools and supplies neatly arranged on the walls. He ran his hand across a stack of wooden crates, his mind drifting back to a night that had left permanent scars both physical and emotional. Bastia, 2003. His unit had been deep in hostile territory, tasked with extracting civilians trapped in an insurgent stronghold. The mission had gone sideways when an ambush left their escape route cut off. Gunfire echoed through the dense forest, flashes of light piercing the darkness. Bob, then known as Phantom for his ability to move unseen, took command after their officer was incapacitated. "Hold the line," he had ordered in a steady, authoritative voice. His men, battered and exhausted, obeyed without question. Over the next 6 hours, Bob orchestrated a counter-ambush, using the terrain and minimal resources to outmaneuver the enemy. By dawn, his team had not only survived, but rescued every civilian under their protection. It was a victory, but the price was steep. Several men didn't make it home. The memory tightened like a vice around his chest. Those who had died had trusted him. He carried that weight daily, a silent burden etched into his soul. He wasn't just raising a flag each morning out of routine, it was a tribute to those he had lost, a reminder of his duty to protect others. Now, another threat loomed. The cartel might not be armed insurgents, but their tactics were just as ruthless. Bob's instincts had kicked in the moment he saw the burned flag. He wouldn't wait for them to push further. Pulling out a small notebook from a shelf, Bob flipped through its pages. The names and numbers belonged to old comrades, men he hadn't spoken to in years, but trusted with his life. He paused, letting his fingers rest on one name, Colonel Rick Harrington. "They think I'm just a farmer," Bob muttered to himself. "They're about to find out different." With renewed purpose, he walked toward the house, his next move already taking shape. The cartel had made their first mistake. Now it was his turn. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The atmosphere in Clear Springs had shifted. People walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact with strangers. At Delaney's diner, Sarah quietly refilled coffee cups while keeping a nervous eye on the entrance. Regular customers spoke in hushed tones, exchanging stories about cartel members harassing businesses around town. Sheriff James Barrett sat at the counter, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "Sarah, how many times have they been in here this week?" he asked, his voice low. "4, Sarah replied, glancing toward the window. "They keep showing up at odd hours. Last night they demanded a free meal. I didn't dare argue." Barrett sighed heavily. "They're pushing to see how far they can go. Problem is, no one's willing to file a complaint. Everyone's too scared." Across town, Emily Thompson arrived at her father's farm, her face tight with concern. She found Bob in the barn, methodically organizing equipment. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Bob paused and turned to face her. "What's on your mind, Em?" "I've been hearing things in town. Cartel members are everywhere. And it's not just in the diner, they've been circling this place too," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "A few people saw that black SUV again, slow driving past the farm." Bob's expression hardened. "I figured as much. They sent a message already." "You can't handle this alone," Emily said firmly. "They're dangerous, Dad. I don't want you getting hurt." Bob placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know what they are, and I know what I'm doing. Don't worry about me, but stay alert. Things might get worse before they get better." Emily nodded, her protective instincts now mingling with quiet fear. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I will," Bob replied, his tone calm but resolute. "You be careful too." Outside, the wind stirred the damaged flag, a reminder that the danger was growing closer by the day. Miguel Santos arrived at Bob's farm in a convoy of dark SUVs. The vehicles came to a halt in a cloud of dust, and several men stepped out, armed with an air of arrogance and menace. Santos adjusted his leather jacket and strolled toward the barn, flanked by two of his lieutenants. He glanced around at the fields with a smirk. "Nice spread you've got here," Santos said as he approached Bob, who stood calmly near the flagpole. "Quiet, peaceful. Must be nice not to have real problems." Bob didn't respond right away. He stood with his hands resting lightly at his sides, his expression unreadable. The slight breeze stirred the charred edges of the damaged flag above them. "I'm guessing you've got something to say, or you wouldn't be here," Bob finally replied, his voice measured and calm. Santos chuckled. "I like a man who gets straight to the point. So, here it is. You're making waves by not staying in your lane. I don't think you realize who you're dealing with. This town belongs to us now, old man." Bob's gaze didn't waver. "That right?" "Yeah, that's right," Santos continued, stepping closer. He looked Bob up and down as if sizing him up. "You're, what, in your 60s? Retired farmer? You should be sitting in a rocking chair, not raising flags like some relic. Let me make it simple, stay out of our business, and maybe you'll get to enjoy your golden years in one piece." Bob tilted his head slightly, his face remaining calm. "You finished?" Santos raised an eyebrow, momentarily thrown off by Bob's composed demeanor. "I'm giving you a warning," he said, his tone hardening. Bob took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. His voice dropped, carrying a subtle edge. "I've seen men like you before, the ones who think cruelty is strength. But here's the thing, men like you don't stop pushing until you meet someone who pushes back." The words hung in the air. For a moment, the tension was palpable. Santos shifted uncomfortably, as if sensing something in Bob that he couldn't quite place. "Let me be clear," Bob continued. "This flag? It's seen more than you can imagine. You think burning it makes you powerful? It doesn't. And if you try anything else, you'll find out just how weak that power really is." Santos narrowed his eyes, his bravado cracking just slightly. Without another word, he signaled to his men, and they slowly retreated to the SUVs. As they drove off, Santos glanced back at Bob, a shadow of doubt now etched across his face. Bob stood silently, watching them disappear down the road. The balance of control had shifted, and both men knew it. Bob sat at the kitchen table, an old landline phone resting beside him. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window, where the damaged flag swayed gently. He flipped through his notebook until he found the name, Colonel Rick Harrington. Taking a deep breath, he dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Thompson, been a while." "Too long," Bob replied, the faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "How's retirement treating you, Harrington?" "About as peaceful as I can stand. But I doubt this is a social call," Harrington replied, his tone shifting to something more serious. Bob leaned back in his chair. "You'd be right. Got a situation here. Cartel moved into Clear Springs. They've been making threats, burning flags, trying to take control of the town." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Harrington spoke again. "And you need backup. I need men I can trust. The kind who know how to hold a line when things get tough," Bob said. Harrington chuckled softly. "You always did get yourself into the thick of it. What's the layout?" "Small town. Good people, but scared. The sheriff's out of his depth. Cartel's pushing hard, but they don't know who they're messing with," Bob explained. "Well, they're about to find out. I've got some of the old crew on standby. You're not the only one who's had enough of sitting idle," Harrington said. Bob felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Appreciated. I knew you'd come through." "We're bringing the cavalry," Harrington said with a grim certainty. "We'll be there soon." Bob hung up, his resolve strengthened. The veterans were on their way, and with them, a force that the cartel would never see coming. The Clear Springs Town Council meeting was tense. Voices overlapped in heated debate, fear thick in the air. Several business owners, including the local hardware store manager and a farmer, expressed frustration over the cartel's growing presence. "They're everywhere," one council member said, her voice shaking. They come into our shops like they own the place. What are we supposed to do? Fight them with words? We can't stand up to them, another added. Maybe if we give them what they want, they'll leave us alone. Sheriff James Barrett leaned forward in his seat, his face tight with frustration. Giving them what they want only shows them we're weak. They'll keep pushing until there's nothing left of this town to control. Easy for you to say, Sheriff, someone retorted. You're not the one getting threats and broken windows. Sarah Delaney stood and addressed the room. If we give in now, they'll just take more. They're already terrorizing my diner. Do you really think handing them power will stop them? The murmurs continued, some in agreement, others fearful. In the corner of the room, Bob Thompson quietly observed the discussion, his expression calm but resolute. When the back and forth showed no signs of stopping, he stood, commanding the room's attention with his presence alone. Enough, Bob said firmly, the conversation's coming to an abrupt halt. Bob, the mayor began, we understand you're upset about what happened to your farm, but this isn't just about my farm, Bob interrupted, his voice steady but intense. You think surrendering will buy you peace? It won't. Surrendering today means living in fear forever. They'll own you, your businesses, your families. I've seen men like them before. They don't stop until you make them stop. Silence followed his words, the weight of his experience pressing down on the room. Some council members exchanged uneasy glances, while others nodded slowly, reassessing their stance. The mayor cleared his throat. We'll put this to a vote, but I think it's clear we can't afford to give up. The tide of fear began to shift, but the threat looming over Clear Springs was far from over. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. At dawn, a convoy of trucks and SUVs rumbled onto Bob Thompson's property. The sound echoed through the fields, announcing the arrival of Colonel Rick Harrington and his team. Bob walked out to greet them, his face calm but showing a rare trace of relief. Good to see you, Rick, Bob said, shaking his old friend's hand firmly. Wouldn't miss it, Harrington replied. We brought some firepower of the tactical variety. Behind Harrington, Master Sergeant James Wilson stepped out of a truck, surveying the area with sharp, analytical eyes. His presence alone commanded attention, his movements efficient and deliberate. You've got good terrain here, Wilson said, nodding toward the natural cover provided by the surrounding fields and tree lines. We can funnel them where we want. The veterans wasted no time. Within an hour, they were establishing defensive perimeters around the farm. Wilson led a group of men to fortify key entry points with barriers and lookout posts. Another team set up a secure communications center in Bob's barn, repurposing equipment brought in from their vehicles. The quiet efficiency of their work spoke volumes. They had done this before. Some townspeople, curious about the sudden activity, arrived to observe. Among them were Sarah Delaney and Sheriff Barrett, both watching with wide-eyed fascination as the veterans coordinated like a well-oiled machine. They move like a military unit, Barrett murmured, impressed. That's because they are, Bob answered. Most of these men served together overseas. This isn't their first fight. Wilson approached, wiping his hands after securing a patrol route. Cartels think intimidation is their strongest weapon, he said to the small group. We've seen worse. They're used to scaring civilians, not fighting people who know how to counter them. What's the plan? Barrett asked. First, we let them show their hand, Harrington interjected, joining the conversation. When they push, we push back harder, and we do it in a way they won't expect. Sarah nodded, a mix of awe and newfound confidence in her eyes. I think they finally met their match, she said quietly. Bob remained focused. This town's been living in fear long enough. It's time to turn the tables. As the sun climbed higher, the farm transformed into a fortified stronghold. The cartel wouldn't know what hit them. Clear Springs buzzed with new energy as the veterans got to work. What had once been a town paralyzed by fear was rapidly transforming into a coordinated effort to defend itself. Under Master Sergeant James Wilson's supervision, key choke points were reinforced around the town's perimeter, Veterans split into teams to train willing residents in basic self-defense and emergency response tactics. Sheriff James Barrett found himself re-energized, his confidence renewed with the veterans' presence. He observed a training session where Rick Harrington demonstrated how to set up communication relays and secure patrol routes. "We're making progress," Barrett said, watching the townspeople follow orders without hesitation. Harrington nodded. "People just need leadership and a plan. They'll rise to the occasion." As word spread, more residents began participating. Farmers offered equipment, business owners provided supplies, and even local teenagers took turns helping at lookout posts. Sarah Delaney organized a support team to prepare meals for those working long shifts. Later that afternoon, the town council gathered at Bob's farm for a planned demonstration. Wilson led them to an open field where a mock drill was underway. Veterans and residents worked seamlessly together, simulating an ambush scenario. The precision with which the veterans moved impressed the council members, who exchanged nervous but hopeful glances. "This isn't amateur work," one council member remarked. "They're turning this place into a fortress." The demonstration was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Carlos Ruiz, a low-ranking member of the cartel, approached with his hands raised. Two veterans escorted him to Bob, Harrington, and Barrett. "I want out," Carlos said quickly, glancing over his shoulder nervously. "I'm done with them. I can give you information routes, supply caches, everything, but I need protection." Barrett exchanged a glance with Bob. "We'll see about that," the sheriff said cautiously. Bob stepped forward. "You better hope you're telling the truth," he said quietly. "You don't get second chances in this game." With Ruiz's offer on the table, new opportunities emerged to cripple the cartel's operations. The tide was turning faster than anyone had expected. Under the cover of night, a group of cartel scouts crept toward the edge of Bob Thompson's farm. They moved cautiously, staying low and using the surrounding brush for cover. Their goal was simple: test the town's defenses and gather intelligence. However, the veterans had anticipated this move. From a concealed vantage point, Master Sergeant James Wilson observed their approach through night vision binoculars. "Right on schedule," he muttered to the veteran beside him. He quietly relayed orders over the radio. Within moments, a coordinated response was underway. As the scouts advanced, trip alarms were triggered, sending up faint flashes of light and bursts of noise that disoriented them. Before they could regroup, shadowy figures emerged from strategic positions, cutting off escape routes. The scouts froze as powerful spotlights flooded the area, exposing them completely. Armed veterans, calm and precise, surrounded them without firing a single shot. "They're walking straight into our trap," Wilson said with a smirk, lowering his binoculars. "Amateurs." The scouts were forced to retreat empty-handed, stumbling back to their vehicles under the weight of their failure. By the time they reported to Miguel Santos, word had already spread Clear Springs wasn't just resisting, it had become a fortress. Santos paced angrily in his hideout. "How did they know our plan?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing. The failure gnawed at him, planting seeds of doubt. He began to wonder if someone within his ranks had betrayed him. For the first time, control seemed to slip from his grasp. The night air was tense as Clear Springs braced for the cartel's full-scale assault. Miguel Santos led a convoy of armed men toward the town, determined to reassert his dominance. He had brought everything he could: muster vehicles, weapons, and reinforcements. In his mind, this was a fight the veterans couldn't possibly win. As the convoy approached the first checkpoint near Bob's farm, all seemed quiet. Santos signaled his men to advance cautiously, but that's when the trap was sprung. Floodlights blazed to life, blinding the advancing cartel fighters. Gunfire rang out not to kill, but to pin them down and disorient them. Veterans, using pre-established defensive positions, controlled the battlefield with precision. They channeled the attackers into choke points, cutting off their ability to maneuver. Explosions from hidden flashbangs sent panic through the ranks, and several vehicles were immobilized by tire spikes. "They're everywhere," one of Santos's men yelled over the radio. "We can't move." "Hold your ground, damn it," Santos barked. though even he could feel the tide turning. Master Sergeant James Wilson coordinated the defense from a concealed position. "Keep applying pressure," he instructed. "We've got them boxed in." The veterans advanced methodically, forcing the cartel fighters to retreat in disarray. Santos, realizing the trap had been meticulously planned, clenched his fists in frustration. His gaze shifted to Carlos Ruiz, his second-in-command, who had been acting strangely since the operation began. "This was you," Santos hissed, stepping toward him. Ruiz didn't flinch. "No, this was you, Miguel. You pushed too hard and underestimated the wrong people." Before Santos could react, Ruiz signaled for several other cartel members to lower their weapons. A ripple of defection spread as others realized the fight was lost. Some dropped their guns and raised their hands in surrender. Santos's fury boiled over. "Traitors! You think they'll let you walk away?" Bob Thompson emerged from the shadows, his calm presence silencing the chaos around them. His footsteps echoed as he approached Santos, who was now surrounded and outnumbered. "You don't get it, do you?" Bob said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Strength isn't about intimidation or fear. Real strength is leading people, protecting them, lifting them up, not tearing them down." Santos sneered, though the defiance in his eyes had dimmed. "You think you've won? There's always another cartel." "Maybe," Bob replied, his gaze steady. "But it won't be here. Not today." Santos's shoulders sagged as the last of his men surrendered. The fight was over. Sheriff Barrett and the town's residents emerged from secure locations, witnessing the cartel's complete defeat. As veterans and law enforcement secured the scene, Bob turned to Ruiz. "You've got a lot to answer for, but if you're serious about change, you'll start by helping us rebuild what your boss tried to destroy." Ruiz nodded solemnly. "You have my word." With Santos captured and his organization dismantled, Clear Springs had reclaimed its peace. The town had learned the true meaning of strength, and Bob had led them through it. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The aftermath of the battle left Clear Springs changed, but not broken. With Miguel Santos in custody and the cartel dismantled, the remaining members, including Lieutenant Carlos Diaz, faced a choice: prison or redemption. Surprisingly, many, led by Carlos, chose the latter. They approached Bob Thompson and Sheriff Barrett, offering to help repair the damage their actions had caused. "I was wrong," Carlos said earnestly to Bob one morning near the rebuilt flagpole. "I thought strength was about power and fear. You showed me it's about something more: community, leadership, and service. I can't undo what I've done, but I want to make things right." Bob studied him for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Talk's cheap, Diaz. Real redemption takes action. We'll give you the chance to prove it." Carlos nodded. True to his word, he began helping with repairs around town, assisting business owners like Sarah Delaney, and mentoring at-risk youth at the local community center. He shared his mistakes openly, warning the young people of the dangers of following the path he had once chosen. Meanwhile, the veterans established a permanent presence in Clear Springs. Colonel Rick Harrington and Master Sergeant James Wilson worked with Barrett to create a local defense initiative, training townspeople in crisis response and security. The town grew stronger, more united than ever. The day the repairs were completed, the townspeople gathered for a special ceremony. Bob, with quiet pride, raised a new American flag on his property. It was a symbol of transformation, not just for the farm but for the entire town. As the flag unfurled in the breeze, a sense of peace and renewal settled over Clear Springs. Strength, they had learned, wasn't found in fear but in standing together. The sun shone brightly as the people of Clear Springs gathered on Bob Thompson's farm for the ceremony. Veterans stood in uniformed rows, their postures straight, eyes focused on the flagpole. Families, business owners, and officials filled the field, the once fearful faces now radiating hope and pride. Bob stepped forward, carrying a new American flag, its colors vibrant and crisp. Colonel Rick Harrington gave him a solemn nod as he reached the pole. With steady hands, Bob attached the flag and began to raise it. The crowd fell into respectful silence as the fabric unfurled in the breeze, catching the morning light. "This flag means something different now," Bob spoke, his voice firm but calm. "It's not just a reminder of the past, it's a promise for the future. We stood together when it mattered, and because of that, Clear Springs is stronger than ever." The crowd erupted in applause. Families embraced, and the veterans exchanged salutes with the sheriff and town council. The flagpole now stood as a beacon of transformation, courage, and unity. As the ceremony concluded, Sheriff Barrett approached Bob, handing him a folded newspaper. The headline read, "Veterans Defense Model Spreads Across Small Towns." "Looks like people are paying attention," Barrett said with a grin. Bob scanned the article, then handed it back with a satisfied nod. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "one burned flag can ignite a movement of change." The wind carried his words as the flag above them waved proudly. Bob's journey showed that even a single act of defiance can ignite lasting change. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment like this in your own life? Share your stories in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.